All right, we are going. We're doing this. Good morning. Welcome back to my channel. And if this is your first time being here, you are very welcome here. Please forgive me for wherever I look. I just keep looking at myself on the camera. But I hope that doesn't matter. Maybe I'll just keep looking off in different directions every now and then just to make it less awkward. Anyways, a little bit of an icebreaker there. My name is Brittany and I live here in Whitehorse, Yukon with my family, my husband and our 2 children. And this is the traditional territory of the Kwanlin First Nations and the Tonquichan Council. I was born and raised here. I feel like I must tell this every time I start podcasting. Not necessarily, but anyways, born and raised here. And I have lived abroad for approximately 6 years of my life. I lived in Oxford for 1 year, that's in the United Kingdom, and I also lived in Llanelli, South Wales. I did charitable work, working with youth, usually who have been kicked out of mainstream education because of some areas in their life they need to work and develop on, and we used outdoor pursuits for development training, and it was probably one of the most fulfilling times of my life, watching young people blossom into who they're supposed to be, who they're meant to be. And I found that really just I feel incredibly honored to have witnessed those parts of their lives. Anyways, here in the Yukon, it is officially winter. It's been snowing. I have been wearing my woolens actually I wear my woolens all year long, to be honest. And so I've been drinking more coffee than normal. And yeah, lately I've been getting up in the morning at around 6 to go out for a morning walk. It's so quiet, and yes, it's cold, but I bundle up. And I've been getting up just to go and have some time to myself. And exercise. That's something I don't really often get to do during the day because I'm at home working on things, running this small business called Crux Fibres. And so getting up early in the morning, making those intentional choices just to fulfill my life has been really nice. So I've only been doing it for about a week. And getting back into doing morning yoga with my husband with our kids running around. It's hilarious. It's a gong show, to be honest. And yeah, so I'm drinking my black coffee in this is called I think it's a soda fired mug. You can see the steam coming off there. This mug it's my favorite mug. It's made by my friend Astrid Cruz. She used to live here with her husband. They actually bought one of the houses that we built. They bought actually the second house we ever built, and we actually fitted their garage with venting so that she could have a kiln in her garage. So yeah, she's a wonderful artist. She's lived in, I think, Northwest Territories, maybe Nunavut, and a lot of her pottery is very earthy and oh gosh, yeah. The way that she makes this is marvelous. Just look at the way that the clay was formed. It's beautiful. Anyways, she's made several other things for me. Maybe they'll be featured on the podcast. But anyways, that's a very long intro. This is a crafting podcast, fiber craft podcast. Everything to do with wool or whatever other fibers I dabble into. A few acquisitions make their presence onto this channel, and I like to support other small businesses, so I will often share about them on this channel. I have works in progress today, and I have no finished objects to share with you. I did have one finished object. I made some more of the 3 mitts, which I mentioned in my last episode, and for my friend Tara. So I made those really quickly because they're so fast to make. I told you guys these were going to be my gift knits. So those have already gone off to my friend Tara, and I used my low mileage wool, my leftovers. I'm still working with my leftovers. And yeah, so that was the only finished object. And then I have 1, 2, 3 knitting works in progress and 2 spinning works in progress. And I put out on Instagram if anyone had any questions to ask me to send them in and I would answer them. And so I've got a few questions at the end after I show one acquisition, and we will cover some interesting topics. So I will put some timestamps because I am going to share my Twists and Turns shawl, which is the mystery knit along for West Knits. So if you don't want to see any of clue 4, actually clue 1 through 4, then you should skip ahead to, actually I will show it now so that you can just skip ahead and forget about going back. So skip ahead to timestamp right here. Okay, so the last episode I shared what I was knitting my shawl in. I believe I only had section 1 almost complete, but I finished yesterday section 3, and I know everyone who's knitting this is like, whoa, where is this going? I could totally imagine where it was going, and I think I was right. I have looked ahead on Stephen West's video. Oh gosh, you guys, it's that coffee machine. Okay, we're safe. I really need to start making my coffee and turning the coffee machine off, but I always just leave it on. Okay, so this is section 1. Very fascinating. A lot of knitting and purling, a lot of casting off and casting on. And the casting off and casting on creates these larger knit stitches, I guess. It's technically a knitted, like you're basically creating a yarn over. So all of these here, when you do the cast off and cast on, you're basically doing a large yarn over, just like this, and then you knit them up. So in the beginning it felt kind of fiddly and you're like, what's going on here? But I was committed. I've never done a West Knits knit at all, ever. So this was going to be my first one. And so after section 1, we went into a bit more of a wingspan with these garter wedges, I guess he calls them. And so you do this side and then this side. So this side, he ends up reversing the garter. So usually when you do garter, you just knit every row. Well, he did it the opposite way where you purl every row. And my wrists, I don't mind purling, but my wrists lately have been not happy with lots and lots of purling or fabric being heavy with purling. This isn't very heavy, but so I did it the reverse. And I think up close you wouldn't even be able to tell that I reversed it. Basically, instead of there being 16 garter rows, so there's supposed to be 16 garter bump rows. On this side, I have 15 garter bump rows, but really, can you tell? I don't think you can. I don't think so. So that was section 2, and after that was section 3, which goes into these weird legs, tails, I don't know. I knew it was going to make sense because there was all these I-cord edgings. So you have this interesting 2-stitch cabling wave that goes along. I think you guys can see that. I can see it on the screen. Anyways, it's curling up, but there's these I-cord edges. So obviously there's maybe the wider wingspan edge, and then the other side will be picking up stitches. And I know that it has to happen. I did look ahead at the video on YouTube. Anyways, so there's one here and one over here. So weird. And then you also pick up along the bottom here and you do some cabling. And then after you finish all those cabling, we do some little embellishments, he calls them, to make those little antler stitches stand out more, but really they should be viewed here as antlers. There you go. So I love my color choices. They are safe color choices for me. I think by now you know I'm not extravagant in my color choices for myself. I think it's because I just like to feel cozy and warm tones. But it's coming along really nice. I love it. I've seen the final shape of the shawl and it's wild. It's probably the most wild thing I've ever knit. I've done an all over cabled cardigan and to me that felt wild, but this is wild. There's a lot of back and forth, an even amount of knitting and purling. And the yarn choice I have, I think I'm still getting my sense of smell back after COVID. So I don't smell these quite as strong, unless they're just not as strong as my first cone I've ever knit from. But this is from JC Rennie in Scotland. This is it's called Unique Shetland. I don't know why it's called Unique Shetland. Maybe it's a different type of crossbreed of Shetland. And this one's called Pecan. This one is Bordeaux or Merlot. I can't remember. I shared in the last post. Bordeaux mix. So these two I'm using. They're woolen spun. I chose these yarns because they are woolen spun and West Knits shawls end up being big and drapey and I just didn't want to feel really like heavy with this extravagant shawl. I don't need anything extravagant. I don't need an art piece on me, but these colors I love, so I will definitely wear this. And if I, in the end, don't like it, I'm always very happy to gift things. So my main color is this, Pecan. My CC is Willow, Pussy Willow by Holst Super Soft. Holst Super Soft. Another 2-ply woolen spun yarn. They're both 2-plies. And the cabling on this looked okay with the 2-ply. We'll get to that later. There was a question that was asked. I'll cover that. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to say. The only thing I modified was in that one section, instead of pearl gartering the wedges, I switched it. I started at the other end and worked my way and just did some math. I will say though that I couldn't get the wedge, the garter row repeats that he says with 76 stitches. I actually had to increase to 80 or 81. So on this next section, for section 4 that I'm working on, which you don't really see in this episode here, I had to actually decrease out some stitches. And it'll make no difference, not huge. Just had to decrease out 2, I think. So that's that work in progress. Anyways, if you skipped ahead, welcome back. We are moving on to my next work in progress. So the next one that I had casted on is just a sock. And this is my Sickle Sock pattern. I've shown these on the podcast before, but I used the pearl gray color, and this is in my custom spun Gotland yarn. It's a medium, I'm calling it a medium gray, but it's definitely medium to light gray. It's a 2-ply yarn. This is spun at Rosebud River Fibre Mill, and the fibers are from my precious flock in Alberta, from my friend Sierra, Crocus Country Shepherdess. And I'm obsessed. I can't get enough of this yarn. I've been knitting so much with it. The 2-ply is wonderful. Most people will say Gotland is best as a 3-ply. I'm loving it as a 2-ply. My latest mill run was a 3-ply because I wanted a fingering weight and I wanted more strength and structure, and the mill would have an easier time plying with more plies. So the sheep in this yarn is Emily, Goatee, and Kylo. I don't believe Emily and Goatee were in my last mill run, and neither was Kylo. I know that some of them had longer locks that the mill could take, but this time I'm getting a bunch of fleeces sent off, and Kylo is definitely going to be back. He's a really nice ram. He sires some of the lambs along with Torfall, who's in this cowl, and I will get to what I'm wearing here in a bit. So yeah, my Sickle Socks are found on my website or on Ravelry, and they are toe up. They feature a fleagle heel, and within the gusset area where you're increasing to create that gusset, you are adding some reverse stockinette details, and then along the cuff as well there are, or the leg of the sock, there are also some pearl bump details, and you can omit them or carry on, but otherwise it's a fun pattern. I'm actually wearing my Sickle Socks. I love them so much. They are holding up so well. Gotland is a nice strong fiber. So if this isn't 100% Gotland, the sheep are a mix of different percentages in their bloodlines, but dominant in these yarns here are the Gotland bloodline. The next mill run will be interesting because Torfall is the sire, and a lot of the lamb's fleeces have higher crimp and longer locks, so it'll be interesting to see what this next mill run of my low mileage wool will be. So my Sickle Socks, they are just my project on the go when we go to church, or if, I don't know, if I want something a little bit more mindless. So right now just working on the toe, and there's nothing but just stockinette. And in the toes and the heels and the cuff, I am holding a strand of silk mohair with a little bit of wool blended in from Les Belles Bouclettes in Ontario. You can see the difference in the toe coloring to up here. And so I've just held it double. So the toe has actually become a 4-ply yarn because I'm holding a 2-ply with a 2-ply. So that has become a 4-ply stronger toe and heel. And I did that in my other pair of socks as well. So Sickle Socks, inspired by challenges and growth. A sickle is a tool that you use to cut down hay to go and harvest your field. So I share a bit more about that in the pattern, and as well as some posts further down in my Instagram feed. The next work of progress that I casted on was in my handspun yarn, in a very earthy yarn that I spun. This yarn has fibers that have come from my friend Melissa, and Melly is, I call her my fiber wife. And she's in Surrey, BC, a spinner as well. She can be found on Instagram. And I'm trying to remember all of the fibers in here, but there's definitely Norwegian, which is a double coat sheep. So it has a downy undercoat and then a hair coat. And then when you combine them together, they add interesting texture. So I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there's some hair bits. I'll show you in the hat too. So yeah, very earthy, very springy. This is just in my handspun. So there's Norwegian in this. So it was a Batt of fiber blended with Norwegian, alpaca, Nora, who is this light gray in this cowl here, a Gotland sheep, and there's Icelandic in here, and I feel like there's one more, but I can't quite remember. It could be Shetland, it could be Cotswold, something from down in BC area. So yeah, I spun this a 2-ply, fairly thick yarn, and the pattern here is the Watch Cap hat by Pearl Soho. Their patterns seem to be really big. Whenever I cast them on, they're always really big. I have to go down to the smallest size or even do some stitches less. So with this one, the smallest size was 120 stitches. I'm using 3.25 millimeter needles, or a US 3. I didn't change the needle size. I know it was okay with this yarn, and I'm liking the fabric that I'm getting. It's not too open, not too dense. Feels really nice. And I'm ready for the cap, the crown decreasing. So I've casted on 100 stitches, and I think the pattern is multiples of 20. So I will do just some math for the decreases, and that will be done for the next time. So yeah, I'm really loving just a simple knit along with this West Knits. I casted this on along with the sock because I just needed something that's gonna get my mind off the West Knits because it just takes so much effort and time to focus. And I was really craving just wanting to cast on some other things, and well, not other things, but one more thing, and that is the Bluewater Cowl by Teresa Weidenar. Probably not saying that right, but the Bluewater Cowl is also, there's not much to show here, but it's in a white color. This yarn is from Ferme Fiola. They are in Manitoba. Christelle is the bestie to Anna from Long Way Homestead, also in Manitoba. And she has a flock of sheep. I don't even think I have my labels on this yarn. She's a flock of her own sheep. Oh, here's a label. That she breeds just for her own benefits. So she gets her own yarn made, she uses it, she sells it. So it's 100% Canadian wool from her farm. And this I got in 2021. And it's come directly from her sheep Dot. So here's the yarn in the skein form. I'm showing you yarn you cannot get, and I'm so sorry, but I thought I would share it with you about the farm and the shepherd, because she does have other sheep and she does get other yarns made. So she actually gets her yarn spun at Long Way Homestead. And Dot is a Shetland cross rideau arcot. And that's, I think it means the middle of the Arcot. It's in Canada. So it's a breed that was developed in Canada. It was like the bloodline was developed in Canada so that they could, for meat, because they lamb twice a year. So meat production is higher when you can lamb, when a sheep can lamb twice a year. So what does it say here? This yarn was spun from a single fleece of one of our pasture-raised ewe lambs near the boreal forest in southern Manitoba, making this lot one of a kind. Yeah, it's a 3-ply sport weight, 290 yards per 100 grams, and this is Dot on the label. Sweet little lamb. Sweet little ewe. And I asked Christelle when I saw her at Knit City if she still had Dot, and she said that she did, but she didn't have her yarn spun individually. She had it blended. So I don't know really what's happening with Ferme Fiola's yarn. I know that she wants to go through some rebranding. So I don't know. But yeah, I will link their website below so that you can check them out. Follow another Canadian wool provider and hop on the bandwagon of Canadian wool. That's my last work in progress as far as knitting goes, and I have 2 spinning ones. So I've talked about, actually I briefly mentioned it in the last episode of spinning Torfall. Torfall is another fleece I process by hand. This is the spun yarn. I'm doing 3 bobbins of singles. Each bobbin should have about 130 grams of fiber. I don't have quite 400 grams. I've shared some of the fleece with Melissa, Melly Knits. And this is the prepared fiber. I have carded it and made some pulled roving. So it's very airy. This is not commercial roving. This is not combed. This is carded. Perfect for woolen spinning. And I have pre-drafted and created this little butterfly. So what I do to prepare for spinning is I draft out all this fiber from either a Batt, or in my case I made pulled roving. So I pulled it off of my carder into roving, literally pulled roving off of the drum carder. And then I go further and pre-draft a bit more just to get more air. So I won't do that now because I'm not ready to spin this, and I don't want to squish all the air out of it. But what I would do to prepare this is I would butterfly on my fingers just to keep it into a little nest. a friend, Vivian Sue on Instagram, shared this in her stories once, and I was like, that's brilliant, because if I just wound it into a ball, every time you wind it into a ball, you're adding some twist to the fiber, and that means that when you go to spin it, you can get some fiber choked up. So the butterfly adds just way less twist when you're just preparing it. So it's nice and squishy right now. Yeah, I'm spinning Torfall's fleece long draw, my sort of default spinning method, and I'm getting about 60 wraps per inch. So I'm hoping for a I didn't do a test, and that's okay. I'm not really bothered. I typically, if I don't have enough yardage, then I'll just do color work and I'll add some other yarn. But this whole bobbin is quite full, and I'm very happy with my spinning lately with my woolen spinning. That's where the fibers are carded, they're not combed. The fibers are somewhat organized, but more really disorganized. And when you spin a woolen sponge or a woolen draw, you are pulling the fiber back. You're allowing the twist to enter into the fiber supply as you pull back. That's the difference between a worsted forward, short forward draft, where short forward, you're not allowing the twist to go into your fiber supply at all. And you're squeezing out all of the air. All of the fibers are really clinging tight to each other, mingling really. They're hanging out together so that they can be strong together. That's really what it is. And a woolen spun yarn, the fibers, you're just giving them air and space so that they can be thermal. And all that airspace in the yarn just means that more air is trapped and keeps you warm. So here in the Yukon, I want to be warm, and I just really love woolen spinning. So Torfall, I've got a third of him spun up, and I have 2 more of these bags to spin through. And then I will ply together to make a 3-ply, nice round yarn. And my hope is to have another sweater. Yeah. And the other thing that I've finished spinning is, oh dear, I've forgotten the band. I will write down below what's the fiber blend of this. So I was spinning on my Ply Blog, which is a foot treadle wheel. Very beginner kind of spinning wheel. I enjoy it because it meets my needs. I don't need anything fancy, but the only thing that I don't like about the Ply Blog is these bobbins only hold about 4 ounces, and if I'm spinning woolen, this thing will not hold 4 ounces. So it's nice and squishy. It's not dense. I've got lots of air in this yarn, and I had to finish spinning on another bobbin. So my plan for this fiber is to spin some more singles to ply together. I'm really into 3-plies right now. I just like more yarn for bigger projects, more options, and the more that I can just do my default spinning method and gauge in yarn or thickness in yarn, I feel like I just have more options for what to do with it all. Like if I want to combine it in color work or whatever, then I have those options. So that's what's on my wheels. I have, this one's been getting spun on my electric eel wheel by Dreaming Robots. They're a producer in the USA. They do Kickstarters, and they do their prototypes with what are they called? Something printers. Words escaping my mind. 3D printers. And then once they've got their prototype, then they actually cast, I think that's the word, cast the molds and actually pour the plastic. So this plastic is the same that you would find in like PVC tubes and whatnot. And I love these bobbins because they come apart. So if I want to travel with my e-spinner, I can collapse my bobbins. And so I've got like, I think 12 bobbins, because I love to just fill up bobbins and then decide on how I want to go about plying. So right now I'm into combination plying. Finally, to do with spinning is Agnes is just full of fluff. I'm tempted to shear her because I just can't seem to get enough off of her. Look at this. Like, I think I've probably already got, oh, maybe a pound of, I would say a pound of fluff from her. This isn't all of it. I've had some of it blended into bats that I'm going to spin. And she's a satin Angora, and what that means is she's very shiny, and her wool it's hollow and translucent, so that's why she's shiny. And anything like alpaca, all your camelids and your like kiviet, anything that's not wool, their fibers are hollow, which makes them extra warm. That's why alpaca is so warm, because the fibers are hollow, which means they're more thermal. They hold the air, the warm air. So Agnes is shedding a lot, and she's been getting into trouble. So yeah, moving on. I shared this cowl in my stories yesterday, and it's been featured on the podcast before. This is my 3-color cashmere cowl by Joji Locatelli, and I used my hand spun yarn from Nora and Torfall. You can go back probably to the 2nd or 3rd episode of my podcast and learn a bit more about this. And the color is silk mohair held double. The white is also silk mohair held double. And then I did striping with Nora and Torfall throughout. So yeah, there's a little bit of lace at the top. Just simple lace, and Torfall's just, he's folding over all the time. I think I need to maybe iron him to keep him flat at the top. So I've been wearing that. I wore it all last winter, and I'll probably wear it again all winter. It's just a nice layering piece. So yeah, I also knit Sierra, the shepherdess, one of these, and used Surrey alpaca because I thought she should be extra warm. And she's got a mix of Torfall and Nora, as well as the first mill run I had with this yarn and the white yarn, or the pearl gray yarn. And my sweater that I'm wearing is the Hood by Vanessa Paisa, and this is a pattern that is designed in Nutillan wool, and I did the steek in the hood. So this hood was originally knit in the round, and then before steeking, I just reinforced with a needle felting tool, which has like 10 needles around, and you just needle felt the one side, snip snip. And yeah, I think you could opt for doing a little edge here. I decided not to. I just wanted to have it roll and hang out. So yeah, the cuffs are a nice texture, but in unspun I really have not been enjoying ribbing in the collars and cuffs. I just find they stretch out a lot. So I might start doing garter in the cuffs and the cuffs and the hems, maybe even the collar, because it is unspun. There's no twist added unless you knit with it, so it can grow. And this is a color from last year's collection called Baja, I think. And I used all of the yarn, and I wish it was longer than body, but it just didn't have enough. And this was all nature black and brown dyed with like a really vibrant purple. And I love purple, but I'm very particular about the purple in this one. I adore. There's lots of Gotland in this yarn as well. They've stopped using Gotland, I think, in all of their unspun yarns. Anyways, yeah, if you decide to go down the road of Nutillan yarn, be aware your limits, because everything is so unique and different from batch to batch, one of a kind. It's easy to have FOMO, and I think getting a taste of it is great. And I have a stash of some Nutillan and I have plans for it, and I feel feel like maybe I'm coming to an end with Nuteeden just because there's only so much wool you can use, and I want to focus a lot on the Canadian wools. But I love treating myself to special things like small businesses that are teaching some really good things, like wonderful things. So that's what I'm wearing. And then I had one acquisition and then one acquisition and 2 things to point out as far as designers and dyers go. So when I was at Knit City, I wanted to get one of these bags, but they were sold out. Take a sip of my coffee. So Deb's bags is 100% handmade. This is lovely. I like it for how much you can get in here, and then this drawstring, the handles, and then an option to add a body strap. Okay, so let me read the card on here. I thought I would point her out because she's got wonderful bags, and I'm not sure she's going to be at Edmonton Fibre Frolic. She might be, but she does a traceability card. Just like I appreciate in wool, she does with textiles. So the textile name is Abraham Moon and Sands Tweed Canvas, cotton and cork. Textile origin, the cork comes from Portugal, the tweed comes from Yorkshire, UK, and the canvas comes from the US. She tells you how to care for the textile, and she wrote to me saying, I hope you love your new bag, Deb. So I messaged her saying, do you have something in like more like earthy colors, and you know, with the tweed, I think that's called tweed. And so she did, and she shared with this one with me, and I was like, yes please. And apparently she's got quite the knowledge of cork. So I've been enjoying this bag. I've brought a few projects around in it. I love just the structure as well. So it can pass as a purse. There's a pocket right here and a zipper right here, and inside, I think there's 2 more pockets. So like if you want to fold a pattern down or put something in, there's 2 more pockets, and then of course the drawstring. So there you go. That is my bag. And then the final 2 things I want to share before I answer some questions is a shawl that I made ages ago, and pair of hat and mitts I want to talk about for the Edmonton Fibre Frolic. So a friend of mine, Charity from Brine Dyeworks, did a shop update. I did not use yarn from her recent shop update, but I wanted to point out the wonderful and incredible dyer that she is. She does a lot of tonals with layers and light speckling. She's a master. She's very calculated when she comes to her dyeing, and she cares a lot about replication. So this here I knit, I'll link the pattern below. I forget, I think it's called the Tiki shawl, maybe. Ziki shawl. It's entirely half twisted rib. It was a lot of work. It's a cute, just little triangle shawl. And this colorway that I used is Charity's Oily Swell color. Look at those, see? Seriously, look at that. Like this is the only kind of, this kind of almost heathered look is what you get with blended fiber. But what I love about Charity's dyeing process is she does so many different layers that gives that heathered effect. And this is twisted rib, so you wouldn't be able to see any like pooling or whatnot. But you can see there's a difference between this skein and that skein, and that is because I believe I bought from 2 different batches. Like from one, I purchased a skein and then purchased a skein again later. So this pattern is really lovely. This is on a very old yarn base that she used to dye on, but what I'm wanting to point out is the wonderful dyer that she is. So please go and check her out. I will link her below. She did do a shop update with some new colors, and I think you'll love them. So there you go. Also, thank you everyone who has shopped my shop update. I did not start out, I meant to start out this podcast with that. Thank you very much for shopping my shop update and the love for all of my low mileage wool. It's incredibly encouraging, and I can't wait to bring you more of that wool. Now, so this is a yarn base I haven't had in the shop for a little bit because my supplier in Canada was having issues with their fibers. So this pattern here is called the Borealis mitts, and it goes along with the Borealis hat. This is designed by Liz Klabine. She's known as Treeline Knits on Instagram. We did a collaboration at the very beginning of my business, and she used a different yarn. And so last year, was it last year or this spring, we decided to use the BFL 3-ply DK that I have that's untreated and knit up this pattern again because I wasn't dyeing the old base. And it turns out it's got practically the same gauge. So the other one was written in a worsted superwashed yarn, and this one is written in the BFL 3-ply DK. It has really wonderful color work definition, and the hat is fun. It's called the Borealis hat or toque, and the Borealis mittens, and it's, you know, Northern Lights. So at the Edmonton Fibre Frolic, I'm going to have kits for this. I have run out of time to be able to bring sweater quantities of this yarn. If I can, then I will, but I've run out of time because my shipment of my yarns returning from Knit City took so very long, and then I had COVID, and I couldn't even plan and do things beforehand because I just had massive brain fog and I couldn't plan. So anyways, that's what's going on. I'm going to have these kits for the mitts and the hats, and Liz will be there. She'll be at my booth. Sierra will be at my booth from Crocus Country Shepherdess. So if you do come to Edmonton Fibre Frolic, be prepared to meet one awesome Yukon designer and one awesome Albertan shepherd or shepherdess. And yeah, feel the BFL. It's shiny. It's got a lovely luster. It is Canadian spun with British wool. It's one of the yarn bases I've had ever since switching over to just untreated yarns, non-processed, non-chemically treated yarns. That's what untreated means. So that is that. Now, if you are not interested in hanging around for the questions, I have 3 questions to answer. Then I will see you next time, my friends. And I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And if you have, please feel free to like and comment. I love your comments. I love reading about what you guys are working on or what things struck you in this episode. If you've learned anything or if you have any questions, just please fire them below or send me an email. All the information you need to know will be down below in the description box. So moving on to these questions, I will try to not be too long with them. There's a lot to go into these questions, but I will point out the things that I feel like are most important. So the first question I was asked was, how do you finish your hand spun? And to those people who are not spinners, what that question means is, how do you set the final ply or the final twist in your hand spun? So when wool is carded, when it's taken from its lock form, which is often curly and crimpy and long or short, when it's taken from the fleece to be used in spinning, you need to open up the fibers. You need to add air. You need to make this long section of fiber become even longer into roving or a nest like this. So this is my own pulled roving, which we've looked at. And when you take this fiber and you comb it or you card it, you are interrupting the fiber's natural place they want to be. You're taking a nice curly lock and opening it up to look like a bunch of dust hiding underneath your couch. And when you add some twist, you're then forcing it to be something it didn't ask to be. And then when you have this yarn like this, all of those fibers are then in a now permanent home. They need to be settled into that permanent home. And how you settle them into that permanent home is somewhat like, you know, if you've ever straightened your hair and you go out into a humid environment or it rains, and then your hair gets fuzzy and it gets curly again. It's because your hair has a memory, and the hair's memory wants to be curly. And it's the same thing with the wool. The wool has memory. It knows the shape it's supposed to be. It knows the curl it's supposed to have. And so it wants to be that. It doesn't want to be in a piece of yarn that has all this twist. So to set that spin, you need to do some things to allow it to settle into its new home. And what you can do is by soaking, steaming, thwacking, and snapping. You can also do foaling. What does that mean? So when Torfall here gets spun into a 3-ply, and then I wind it off into a hank or a skein, whichever word you want to use. Some people say they're interchangeable, some people say they don't. Most people just use the one word. If you wind it into a hank, then you would soak it in water. Now for me, I spin woolen, and the reason why I spin woolen is because I want a light and I want an airy yarn, and I want it to be just squishy. And if I put it into cold water, it's gonna wake up the fibers and say, oh hey, I'm in this new home and this helps me settle in a little bit in this cold water. But if I submerge, like I did with this one, into hot water, just gently submerge into the hot water, those fibers are like, wow, okay, we are alive and we can move and dance. All right, my inner geek has come out. So those fibers can then just open up and settle and move around a little bit in that water. And then once you let it soak for a bit, you rinse it out, and you can do more to help those fibers settle into their permanent resting position, their permanent home. And that is where thwacking comes. Thwacking is when you take a skein of yarn after it's been soaked and it's still somewhat dry, or sorry, still somewhat wet, and you literally thwack it at something like the bag or a chair. You literally just thwack it. And what that is doing is it's shocking the fibers. It's creating some impact, and the fibers are going, whoa, I can have some space to move around. And so that thwacking allows the fibers to just settle in and open up. And what happens with thwacking is you will lose some yardage because the fibers are shrinking back up. They're trying to get back to the form they were originally in. They have that memory to curl back into the form that they were originally in. So that's thwacking. Snapping is when, same type of thing, except for you're not adding major impact against a surface. You're using your hands, and you thwack like this, and you move around, and thwack again, move around, thwack again. You just keep doing that around. Sorry, snap. Again, thwacking, you have to make sure you get all around the circumference of your hank or your skein. And if you do this side, you do this side. So those are ways that I like to finish my hand spun yarn. If I'm being lazy, I'll just do the snapping. If I really want to see if something's going to really bloom and open up and change its thickness, then I will do a thwacking. So that's why you need to set your spin. I did mention foaling. The foaling is when you spin a single. This is a single. This is not called a single ply because it's not been plied. This is called a singles. So if you spin a singles and you want to keep it a singles, you need to make sure that the spin isn't too high. And then my Canadian singles yarn is fold. Basically, after it's been spun into a singles, it gets hanked up, and then it gets put into a bath of hot water for a small amount of time, and then straight into a bath of cold water. and then you do that 3 times. I would do that 3 times until I can see the fibers actually tightening up. So you're just tightening up the surface of the yarn, and that's going to create strength because it is a singles. It's only plied in one direction. It doesn't have anything to help reinforce it with a counter ply, with another singles yarn to ply together. So that's one way of finishing another yarn, is if you have a singles. I think that's, yeah, it's interesting. Yarn, fiber, we're forcing it to be something it didn't want to be. It wanted to be on a sheep, but we're forcing it to be something. In a loving way, I guess, maybe? I don't know. What's the message in that comment? The other question I had was, can you share the best knits to use different plied yarns? This is another biggie, and there are some questions you should ask yourself first. What is the garment that you want to have, or accessory? Do you want it to be warm? Do you want it to be cooling? Do you want it to be airy? Do you want it to be dense? Because yarns have plies for reasons. Reasons for stitch definition, but as well as strength. So a singles doesn't have as much strength as something that has, say, 8 plies. The reason for that is because a singles has much more surface contact with each fiber, whereas something with much more higher plies has less contact surface per fiber. So more twists, more plies, there's less abrasion on each fiber, so you would maybe expect less pilling, or depending on what the fiber is. You can't say there would be less pilling because certain fibers will pill more than others, like cashmere. So a singles will often be referred to as a yarn that's good for drape, is lightweight, and is good for stockinette. I've used it with color work, and it's not my favorite. It does fill out a little bit, but because it's usually a fold yarn, it doesn't really bloom as much. So singles, I love it in sweaters. I did actually, I shouldn't say that. My singles yarn was used in a color work sweater in the in the Legacy pullover by the Bluebird box. And that actually looks really nice with color work, the singles, because it is woolen spun. But if it's worsted spun, smooth and slick, do a swatch, see if that works for color work. But otherwise, a singles superwash yarn I would use for drape, and yeah, for drape. So like a cardigan drapiness, or a shawl that's got some little bit of lace work would be nice in a singles. A 2-ply yarn is very good for lace, because the 2-ply, when you knit into lace, they want to pull away, they want to open up. So if you think about your lace work and you want to open it up, for example, this is a 2-ply with some lace, those lace stitches are very defined because the plies are wanting to pull away from each other. There's no other ply to hold it, to hug it together. So this as well, the lace is very, very visual, very defined. So a 2-ply is very nice in lace, stockinette, and color work. A 3 or more ply is the yarn you would grab if you want to knit cables. A 3-ply yarn is also the type of yarn you would knit for something that's going to have a lot more strength, or need a lot more strength. People often use, like a sock yarn is usually a 3 to 4 ply. So sock yarn doesn't necessarily mean it's meant for socks, but it's described like that because it has 3 or more plies. I mean, this sport weight 3-ply isn't called a sock yarn, but if it's fingering weight, usually it's referred to as a sock yarn. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a 3-ply would be wonderful in cables, in stockinette, in texture. I would not use a 3 or more ply yarn in lace work, because it fills in the space. Your lace work, your precious lace work that you work so hard to make, just gets lost. Because they're not, the stitches, instead of wanting to pull away from each other, the plies, the singles, instead of wanting to pull away from each other, they want to hug each other, so all of your lace work is just closer together. And yeah, higher applied yarn just also makes for nice color work because it just fills in the space. Those are how I would describe the best way to use different yarns with different plies. So your singles, kind of an all over yarn except for cables. Singles is not good for cables. It just doesn't want to lift up as much. You can, don't not use it because of that. A 2-ply, definitely not cables. 3-ply, yes. But otherwise, yeah, if you're thinking about texture and stitch definition, I am going to link a website below that I refer to a lot when people are saying, what yarn should I use for this type of project? Because it gives a really good overview of different yarns and the amount of plies and what they're great for in stitch definition. And the website's blog is called The Why of Ply. So that's question 2. And finally, with question 3, how to choose yarn for a project. I get asked this a lot. I say, well, what is the project you would like to make? And they will say yada yada yada. And I will say, well, can you go to the website or the Ravelry page and see what yarn they used in that project? Yes. Okay. What is in that yarn? What's the fiber content? Does it have plies? How many plies? What was the other question? Was the yarn treated? So is it chemically treated to be machine washable, or is it untreated or non-superwash, as a lot of people call it? Those are questions to ask. When you see a pattern that's released, lots of people jump to their stash and see and looks to see what they can use. But the first thing I do is I look at that pattern, I look at what is the fiber content. If the sweater was knit in 100% alpaca and it's a 3-ply yarn, I am going to expect it's warm and it's drapey and it's going to grow in length because alpaca is not wool. It doesn't have tines along the fibers. It's not going to be grippy, and it will fill in some space, but it's not going to grip like wool does. That's what the great thing about wool is it's grippy and it's like Velcro. It wants to be together, whereas alpaca is like, I don't want to be with my neighbors. So it grows in length, and again, it's warm. So say you want to make that garment, but hey, you're going through menopause or you run hot, then you might not want to choose a yarn with alpaca in it. So I always look to see what that pattern was knit in. What is the fiber content? Because the fiber content also helps dictate your final fabric. So if there's anything that's non-wool, that is a camelid, a silk, synthetic, those are often all drapey fibers. And if it's the dominant fiber, then that yarn will be more drapey. But if it's not the dominant fiber in the blend, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be drapey yarn. So I always ask, like, yeah, if I want to make this, you know, looking at the pattern, what are some characteristics of it? Like, what is this? What is the stitch pattern? Is it cables? Is it lace? Is it plain stockinette? Those are the things you want to look at. Break it down as to what yarns they used and what's in the yarns. And finally, if a yarn is treated to be machine washable, it's often more drapey. And the machine washable yarns that we see dyers using are mostly merino, blue-faced Leicester, Polwarth. I've seen that. I've seen superwashed Corriedale. There's probably everything that's pretty much superwashed, but the stuff that we often find most is merino and blue-faced Leicester. And when a fiber is chemically treated to remove the scales along the fiber, it's creating a slick fiber. And what do we know about something that's slick, like nylon or silk or alpaca that doesn't have scales? Is it means that fiber is now slick, that fiber is more lustrous, and it's more drapey. So like the West Knits shawl that he's knitting is knit in a superwash yarn, and if you see him hold up the shawl, it's very flowy and very drapey. So if that is a quality that you appreciate in the thing that you want to make, then those are the yarns you want to choose. Something else to keep in mind when you're choosing a yarn for a project is if you are dabbling into different fiber type, so going from merino to Icelandic, you're going to have a difference in yardage. So the finer wools usually typically yield higher yards, and the medium to long wools will yield typically lower yardage. It's because it's a denser fiber, it's thicker, the micron is higher, and it doesn't have as much grist, it doesn't have as much elasticity. So that's something else to keep in mind. So yeah, just going back to that, the number one thing I do before I choose a yarn for a project is I immediately go to that pattern, look at what the yarn is that they used. First I look at what is the fiber content. Is that yarn chemically treated to remove any properties from it? And how many plies does it have? Because if that pattern was knit to create a cabled sweater, but it's a 2-ply yarn, immediately in my head I'm thinking, why do they use a 2-ply? But if it's a woolen spun yarn and it's a 2-ply, those cables can look more defined. So that's how I approach how to choose a yarn for a project. But really, guys, you can use whatever yarn you want to knit whatever project. But if you go into it without thinking about what the end result will be, you might find yourself disappointed. So I do like to educate myself when a pattern is released and what they've used, because I might say I have this yarn in my stash, but actually it's going to create a very light garment with no drape, because I use a lot of woolen spun yarns. So if I want something a bit more drapey, I might need to add something like a silk mohair or go and find something else. So anyways, I hope that was helpful for you for me to answer those questions. I'm just going to take a little nip around to see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I don't think so. I will share at the end of this video just a little bit of footage that I took last week when I went out for a walk, and otherwise this was fun. It was nice to catch up with you guys with not as much stuff this time. And yeah, I do want to point out one last thing, actually, now that I remember it, is I've had lots of questions about my low mileage wool. I'm getting very low on it, and I would love to bring some to the Edmonton Fibre Frolic. So my shop is closed right now. But in the next few weeks, definitely by November, my next batch of fleeces will be at the mill. I don't know if it will be a 2 to 3 month wait. I don't know if it'll be a 6 to 8 month wait. Normally the mill that I've been using has been a quick turnaround because my batches are smaller, and so it's a nice batch to do in between the larger batches. So I can't give you an ETA on my next batch of low mileage wool, but I do have lots of yarns that I do dye and fibers that I will be blending. The spin-off flock will probably happen in the new year. Depends on how fast I can process all the wool. I typically do 6 different fleeces, and on top of that, you know, being a mom, a wife, a homemaker, and a business owner, there's only so much my body can handle with processing wool as far as like cranking the carder. I did get a bigger carder, so I can produce a lot more now. So anyways, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I so happy to be here, you guys, and thank you so much for all of your wonderful messages and your encouragement. Yeah, I'm hoping to be able to get some better setup with video and sound, so we shall see. Anyways, bye for now. decided it was time to take a break from the West Knits mystery knit along. I was feeling a little overwhelmed with what still needs to get knit, and I guess just all the things that I want to cast on. So I thought I should just get outside, stretch my body, get some exercise, still bring some knitting. So yeah, I've casted on a hat in my handspun, and here we go. It's on my little twister, and I'm just walking on some paths by our house. Hear an airplane in the background. It's definitely fall here, and the snow is not here yet. It is on the mountains, but growing up, I remember Halloween approaching and there would always be snow on the ground, and it would be very cold, and you'd be wearing your snowsuits underneath your costume, and your pillowcase would be in your hand to fill it up full of candy. So it's as strange as climate change happens, and northern living changes a lot because of lack of snow. And anyways, as you can see, there's lots of fall colors around. So the sun's shining through the clouds. Just do a little 360. This is just sort of the typical kind of scene you would see walking through the woods. And the leaves have all fallen. So we're going to carry on my walk before I have to pick up Calvin from the bus. I've just finished my walk to the bus stop to pick up Calvin, and I wanted to show you how far along I got on my little hat here that I'm making with my handspun. And I wanted to mention something about handspun. Sorry about this hand holding situation, bear with me. Okay, so handspun. When I first spun my first yarn, it was colors I wouldn't have normally gravitated to. And when I finished, it was just a singles. I didn't ply it, and I immediately thought, oh, this isn't very nice. It's not a nice yarn. And I didn't want to work with it. So I put it away, and I still to this day haven't worked with it because I just don't care for it. But what I learned from that is that you don't know what kind of yarn you want to spin until you know what kind of fabric you like. And I've known that from very early on, and I hear other people say the same things, and it just, the more I knit with my handspun, the more I realize how I want my yarn to be spun. So if you are someone who's spinning yarn, your own yarn, and you are like, oh, this is thick and thin, it's not very nice, it's not consistent, yada yada yada, then I encourage you to go and cast something on, chain something on, and see what happens, and then make a judgment call of whether or not you like that yarn. And when you spin, write notes, write how fast you were treadling, or how fast your e-spinner was going, how many drafts you were doing within a certain amount of time, or how far you were drafting those fibers, and then make conclusions and see if you want to change things up.